Hey everyone, this is Angela from Fabricworks Studio. Welcome to my podcast. In this podcast, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I have learned over the 10 years that I have been an artist and some of the things that have really helped me. And so in other words, just my tips and advice that I would give to someone who is a new artist just starting out. So the very first lesson for me, and I'm still learning it, is really in one word, and it's focus. Focus, 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 okay? This is very difficult to do in the art world. And if you're an artist like me, what oftentimes happens is that you are hypersensitive, very, very hypersensitive to the world around you. Everything intrigues you. Everything makes you curious. You want to jump into anything and everything. And so my first piece of advice is to grab onto something, see it through to the end, and see what you learn from it. But take one thing at a time and focus on one thing at a time. It just makes life so much easier. My second lesson would be to simplify. Okay. And I think that as artists, it takes time to learn to really simplify. You simplify in your work. You simplify in the process that you use for doing your work. You simplify in your statement as an artist, what you're putting out to the world. And I've learned to do this in Fabricworks over the years. And it's taken me a very long time. And I would say I'm still really learning how to do it. It's taken me an awfully long time to learn how to just keep things simple. I think for me, the biggest lessons have come in the management of Fabricworks as a business. From developing websites, even if I'm making over websites, to figuring out the work-life balance of how do I run the studio and do the activities for the studio and have a life, and work. I work full-time as a technology consultant, and luckily I work at home. But it wasn't always that way. And especially at the very beginning of Fabricworks, I worked in an office every day from 9 to 5. And, I had to be focused on work. And at the same time, I'd be dreaming up this studio and dreaming up what I wanted to do when I would get home. And so I moonlighted Fabricworks for a very long time. And many artists work that way. All during the day, you're dreaming in the back of your mind of the next project in your studio and what you're going to do. And you get home, and then fatigue sets in and you're not able to do as much. And so throughout the years, I've really learned to simplify and get things done. Pick the most important things, at any different stage in your journey, and work on those things. And then it's about figuring out how to make it simple enough to where you can physically, emotionally, mentally get it done. And then experiencing that accomplishment and then moving on to the next project. So that would be my second lesson. For the third lesson, this is one that I'm actually really just taught myself this year and last year, which is don't overthink it. I tend to, I'm a planner. I'm a long-term planner. So I love, thinking of something and thinking of all the contingencies. And I think about the results and what I'm going to do based on certain results. And I love doing that. And I can really just get caught up in that. And so now I catch myself and I say, okay, just stop thinking about it and just do it. Okay. Now, I do admit that you certainly should think about things that you endeavor. You do want to think things through. Think about your motivation. Think about what your intentions are. Think about why you want to do it. And then you should spend a little bit of time thinking about how you want to accomplish something, especially if it's a really big task, because certainly you can kind of go down this rabbit's hole and never come back from it, if it's not well thought out. So, there is a balance there. But when you find yourself just constantly thinking about the same thing, it kind of means that you need to get started with it and just do it. Just try it. Because inevitably what will happen, most of the times you go off track from what you've been thinking about anyway. Okay. The actual thing that you're doing works out much differently much differently than what you originally thought it would be. So, one of the things is really just get started with it. If it's a project, if it's a design, if it's a technique that you're looking to try, just get started with it, see how it goes, and let that situation speak to you, and then you become very in tune with that situation and being able to react and then even be proactive in it. One of the things that I use this for a lot in my studio is when I'm creating art. And I get this question a lot, and a lot of people will ask me, well, how did you do this? How did you come up with this? They'll look at my quilts or something at a quilt show, and that's one of the first questions I get. It's like, what's your technique? What's your technique? And I have a variety of techniques like any artist, but one of the things about my art is that it's very organically created. It's hard to explain like the actual steps that I use to create something. When I'm in my studio with fabric and picking fabrics and things, I'm really very in tune to the medium that I'm using. So if it's fabrics or dyes or paints, I'm constantly listening in my studio, and I do this kind of listen to the work, and so usually when I work on a piece, I don't have a set plan. Really, I don't remember any piece where I've had like a real set plan as to when it is done. I've even sketched out quilts, done templated pieces, where you sketch it out, you cut and you create your templates, and I've, ended up changing them. The pieces end up very different than what I've sketched out. When I do sketches and when I do templates, that usually is just a jumping off pad for me. And I'll talk a lot more about this in other podcasts, but that's just the type of artist that I am. And so this edict for me has really, really worked. Not to overthink things, just do. And keep it that pure and really that simple. And I actually have this phrase, don't think, just do, up in my studio. And so when I'm overthinking something, I just look up at it and it just kind of snaps me out of that. And it's like, okay, it's time to do. It's time to do. Edict number 4, just do you. That's a commercial or something. I don't know where I got that from, but just do you, I think, is perfect. It's really perfect for any artist, no matter what medium you're in. If you're an illustrator, a collector, a photographer, textile artist, you're a quilt maker, just be you. And this is really important, I think. don't worry about what's going on in the outside world. Don't worry about what all other artists in your field are doing. If you're left of center, so, revel in that space and be there. Be a maverick if you have to. I always like to play nice with the other artists, of course. But, if it's for you to have a journey, down the road less traveled, then stand tall in that and stand proud in that. And don't design for other, groups, and don't design for other people, and don't design for other artists. For me, Fabric Works, again, is a very organic type of studio. And so, I don't design the same pieces over and over and over and over. And that's one of the things that you do see in the quilt world, is that you'll see people use the same technique or the same look. And they'll have like a 10-year career on that. And they'll be very successful with that. We have very famous, very successful artists who do that. Now, there's a difference between doing that and having a signature. Okay, see, a signature is, this is what I'm known for. But within my art, I explore. There's still that exploration within the art. And so for my pieces, I don't try to be very, very different, each from one year to the next. But there are many things that I'm interested in, and they find their way into my art. And so, for example, this year I did Summer Studio, and Summer Studio for me is a time of the year. It goes from May until August when I'm experimenting. And it's a time when I allow myself to really experiment with different medium. I may take classes, I try things, I do very different things, and I always make it a point of learning something new during the Summer Studio. Because the rest of the year in my studio, I'm really just kind of working on pieces in the collection, or I am doing a lot of exhibitions throughout the year, and so I'm very busy. But the Summer Studio for me is that time when, I'm really fulfilling that curiosity. And I'm like, okay, let me just take this time to learn this medium. And so that inevitably makes it into, the new pieces that come out every year. And so, like this year, I've been learning knitting and weaving. And not because I want to be a master knitter or anything. I was actually a crocheter in my early days, when I was, early teens or something. I had a crochet business. So I really did actually start out as a crocheter, and I love working threads and fibers through my hands. But anyway, this year, I wanted to learn knitting and weaving, mainly to bring more texture into the pieces. I'm more interested in the texture that you can achieve, through these two activities. And so, that inevitably it's making its way into my thought process for the new pieces that I'm coming out with next year. So you'll probably see some knitting, weaving pieces. I'm still kind of working that out in my head, but you'll probably see some of that in my later collections, coming out in 2016 and 17. And so, that inevitably happens. Now, what's interesting about being an artist is that, I could certainly, look around and see if anybody else is doing that. Or, what I usually do is I work it out in my head, and then I kind of experiment with it, and I will put it out there. It may be different than anything else that's out there, that I have ever seen out there. But that's okay, because I'm just doing me. This is me. And so I say, don't be afraid. A lot of artists, they want to, they want to sell, and I've been there. You've got a show coming up and you want to sell what the people are buying, and look, hey, if you're trying to make money, if you're trying to pay the rent, okay, then you do what you have to do. I understand that. But in each endeavor, look to bring yourself into that, and don't lose yourself. Don't lose yourself is what I would say, because the thing is once you allow it, it creeps in more and more and more and more. And the next thing you know, you're making these pieces and you have lost yourself in these pieces and you don't even know what you're putting out anymore. And so my edict really is to take the challenge, be courageous, just do you. I have another story that I really want to share with you about it. As you can see, I feel very passionately about this. Blogging. Now, many people ask me, why did you wait so long to come out with your blog? My blog is, as you may know, it's trending in surface design. Okay. So it's at www.trendinginsurfacedesign, it's all one word.com. And I've actually just come out with my blog. Okay. But I've been, I'm a technology consultant in my day life, right? And so, I know technology. It's not to say, oh, I didn't come out with my blog because I didn't know how to blog. I knew of blogs very early on. I read many blogs, and most people kind of jumped on the bandwagon. And I remember within my little artist community here in Charlotte, North Carolina, there were a lot of quilters jumping on the bandwagon and blogging back when it started, back when it was very popular for artists to have a blog, 2006, 2007, 2008. And so there are many blogs that you go online and you'll see, if you go to their archives, you'll see that they go back like 8, 9, 10 years. And I remember when that came out, and I remember when everybody was doing it in our guild and in our smaller study groups. And I was not doing that. I started my studio in 2004. I started exhibiting in 2006. I didn't have my first website until 2008. And so for me, I felt at that time, I didn't really have a platform that I really wanted to share. And there was not that real urge of, hey, let's blog. And then the other reason was that I really didn't want to interrupt with my learning process in the studio. At that time, I'm working full time. I didn't have a lot of time. And so I would come home, eat dinner, be with my family, and then I would be in the studio working on pieces, right? And so I would be in my studio from like 7 until 1 o'clock in the morning, and then getting up and going to work the next day. And then on my weekends, I would do on Saturday from 7 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And that was just consistently working in the studio, and then Sunday would be off. So for me, there was no time to really blog, And I remember a friend of mine telling me, hey, you should get a blog and I remember telling her, hey, well, I work full time. I don't know, when am I supposed to do that? How do you do that? How do you do it? How do you find time for this? And she was like, oh, well, you can schedule your post in. It's really great. You should get one. And I just kind of really put it off. I just wasn't feeling it. It didn't feel like a right fit for me at the time. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to put this on the back burner and, I'll revisit it. And here it is I don't know, what are we at, 6 years later, that, I'm finally coming out with my blog, and so, like I say, for me, it wasn't something that I felt like I wanted to do, whereas everybody else was doing it. But now trending in surface design really feels natural. It feels natural to do the podcasting. It feels like something that I want to do, and so there's my edict, just do you. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Just do you. So in with that edict, I would say the next piece of advice I would give is really, as an artist, especially as a new artist, work on developing your voice. Okay. Art is about having a point of view, and it's about having a voice. What are you saying in your art? Okay. And even if you're just coming up with some really pretty pattern, in the quilt world, you see, especially in the traditional quilt world where I am, you kind of see a lot of, teacups and butterflies and bluebells. And, if you go to the local quilt shows around here, you'll see that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not downing that. But what is the point of view? The point of view is very, it's pretty obvious what it is. That life is great, and there is this Pollyanna look, to it's a sweet country life, country living, and that's wonderful. That's all fine and good. I'm not downing that at all. And part of me loves that, loves, my family's from South Carolina, and it's about family, it's about food, it's about great weather. You go to the beach every year. You may go into the city and see a play or something like that, but life is good. LG, life is good. So I'm all for that. So the thing is what is your point of view? Now for me, I started my very first quilt class, was just a very basic traditional quilt that we were to make. It was a block pattern quilt. We had to piece it together, right, and come up with everything. And my teacher, Jean, was 65 at the time, I think. I still kind of keep in touch with her. And she had retired from nursing, and she was teaching quilting. And we were one of the 7 classes that she was teaching. I mean, this lady was so cute. And, she would wheel in her suitcase and everything. And, here we were trying to learn to quilt on a Saturday morning at the local community college, right? And I quickly found out in that class that I was not destined to be a traditional quilter. We had we had 5 colors that we had to come up with. I came up with 7. We had to use all cottons. I used cottons and silks and suedes. Okay. And I remember with each artistic decision, I kept asking Jean, hey, Jean, I would bring in this piece of silk and I would say, hey, can I use this silk? It's really cool. And she was like, no, you really need to use all cotton because it's going to shrink up when you put it in the machine and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I would go home and I would do what I wanted to do, right? And I would use denim. I had all kinds of stuff in that quilt. It was too much. It was a hot mess, really, but it was too much. And then I would ask her, like, hey, what happens if you use a 1/2-inch seam instead of a 1/4-inch seam? No, you really need to use a 1/4-inch seam because and she would give me these rules of quilting. And I just knew from the very beginning, that I was not going to make it as a traditional quilter, because it was like, I just wanted to break all the rules. It wasn't something that I was doing consciously, but just to my aesthetics, they were very, very different. In my quilting now, I would say basically when I'm making quilts, I'm kind of in the school of fusing and whole cloth. I fuse when I'm using templates, what have you. I leave my edges raw, for example. Many people are like, oh my God, you have raw edges. Yeah, well, hey, yes, I have raw edges, okay? And guess what? I even let them fray sometimes, right? But I mean, I'm just saying that's just the type of quilter that I am. My aesthetic is a very modern aesthetic, and that really permeates throughout all of my work. If you look at anything that I'm doing, even if it's a knitted piece or a weaved piece, you're looking at a quilt, a fabric art, a digital piece, you'll notice minimalism, you'll notice a lot of abstraction, you'll notice a lot of repetition, geometrics, but it's all very abstract. And it's all, well, I was not even say abstract, but it's all very modern and very contemporary. I do actually have flowers in my, I have flowers in my portfolio, but they're not quite what you would think. I don't have any teacups. I don't have any bluebells. I don't have any, but I don't know if I have any butterflies in there. I might. There might be one or two butterflies in my designs, but I would say definitely my aesthetic is very modern. My voice or my style, my signature, as I think about what my signature is, it's definitely a love of colors and a love of textures. One of the things you'll notice that I do in my colors, if you look at my pieces, I would say the digital surface design pieces that I do, because I do a lot of work on the computer and then either turn that into a quilt or a tapestry or what have you. In a lot of those pieces, I use very harmonious colors or one color and many different shades of that same color, so I can have a piece that has 7 different reds in it, and it's still a very interesting looking piece. So I think that's one of the things you'll notice about my digital work. In my work that's not digital, if I'm using commercial fabrics and putting them together, you'll notice in my pieces that I use a lot of different colors. Like I would say, as I look at my pieces now, at least 5 colors in each piece, 5, 6, 7 colors, and getting them all to work harmoniously together. And so that's certainly a signature. The other signature that I have really is in the quilts. It shows up in the quilts and the tapestries, but it really is throughout. It's a very simple construction, very, very simple construction. For example, all of my quilts, I would say 99% of my quilts have a 1/2 inch border around them. If that, and many of those borders are the same as the top, and so you don't even see the contrast there. So many of my pieces, they don't really look like the traditional, quilt with high contrasting colors, and you just see this very, dark border with the light quilt work inside of it. I don't play around with a lot of different borders because that's not really where I put my onus. When I make a quilt or tapestry, it's in the actual piece and not in the construction of the piece. The binding and all of that I consider as part of just the construction of the piece. And so my onus is really in the design of the piece. And that's really where I come out. And that's where I spend most of my time. And so, although the finishes are, very, very well done, neatly packaged, most of my, my oomph in that piece is really in the design of the piece. And as a matter of fact, when I do shows, that's where I get all of my A pluses. It's like, well, you could try this other binding, but boy, that design is A plus. It's like, okay, great, and then I know that I've done well. That for me is like perfect. The other thing is actually for my quilts, I don't spend a lot of time on the quilting, because again, it's in the design of the piece. And I actually don't use the quilting as another character in that piece. For me, it's in the original design, the colors, the textures that can be brought out from that original design. My quilting is usually half an inch. The stitches are usually half an inch apart. And I mean, they're in intricate patterns and things, but I really don't use a lot of the traditional free motion patterns that you'll see out there. Like many people, they use the feather pattern, and it's like, I don't really do that. I just kind of make up my stitching to contour with what's going on in the piece. And I'll, definitely be willing to do some podcasting on that, and, just how I come up with things. This time, actually, lately I've been working with a quilter. I work with a long arm quilter because I wanted my pieces to have a very uniform look. And so we put them on the computer, and we actually, I can send her a pattern on the computer. It's so cool. The technology in this is so cool. So when I complete a top, I can actually do the stitching through the computer, sketch it out, and she does a test run on a piece of fabric. She saves it in there and then puts my quilt top into the machine, and then she walks away from it, and then the computer quilts it. So it's really, really awesome. The results have been very, very good. And that's Kathy. I call her Kathy Quilts. But she's Cowgirl Quilting is her company, and she works out of Cary, North Carolina. So she's close to my fabric printer, Spoonflower, too. So it's really great to have it all done in North Carolina. So, if you purchase a quilt from me, they're made to order, and they are made in a 6 to 8 week period. The patterns are all saved, and so it's not like one person purchases it and then that quilt is gone forever. These quilts are made where everybody can enjoy them. And also it brings the price down. I don't sell quilts for $10,000, I wanted everyone to be able to enjoy a quilt from the studio and enjoy just having this, fabulously modern contemporary piece in your home. But it's really a great signature that I'm really developing and being known for. Having a certain very clean designed aesthetic, very modern. And I've had people see my shows and they would say, man, your stuff is not what I expected. When you told me you were a quilter, it's totally not what I expected. And I was like, yeah. I even considered putting the following tagline, it ain't your grandma's quilts, is that kind of thing. Because that's what I end up telling people as I'm telling people about my quilts. And they say, oh, you're a quilter? Oh, great. The very first question I get is, oh, do you make bed quilts? And then my response, no, we don't do bed quilts. And it's not like your grandmother's quilts. It's really not what you are thinking of. You have to come and see it. And so I really try to get that out there to people and just, come and see a show or go onto the website, www.fabricworkstudio.com. Go onto the website, take a look at the galleries, because the designs are very, very contemporary. And these are fabric art pieces that, can certainly go next to a painting in your house. I've mounted my quilts on canvas, on stretched canvas. So you can put them up right next to your favorite paintings. But they really do make a room. I have a couple of photos on the website with my quilts hanging in rooms and in my rooms in my own home. And, they really do make a conversation piece. So develop your voice, work on the following two questions. What is your signature style? Like, what are you known for, or what do you want to be known for? Okay, so when somebody looks at your pieces, what are some of the characteristics in your pieces that really kind of make you stand out? And they exist in all of your pieces, you know. And so, you know, in all of my pieces, we have very simple, I just talked about, we have very simple construction, you know, the use of the colors, or the use of the one color that's really being explored. You know, the stitching, the stitch work, I think probably is something that people really do know me by. You know, if you look at my quilt hanging in a row of other quilts, you'll know a Fabric Works Studio piece. You will. You know, I've seen it myself. You know, it's like, hey, which one is mine, you know? So, you know, what is your signature style? And then also, what is your design aesthetic? You know, we're all artists, and so we have a certain aesthetic for things. You know, certain things work for you, whereas they may not work for other people, you know. And so that's why I go back to that, just be you. Don't be anybody else. You know, if everybody else is using cotton and you want to use silk, go ahead and use it, you know. And so in my pieces, it's whatever I'm feeling, you know, and it's my certain aesthetic is one that's very clean. I don't like to see a lot of different things in a quilt, you know, and so I've made those quilts very early in my career. And they were a hot mess, okay? I call it the kitchen sink quilt, really, because when you just throw everything in there in terms of your stitching, some people have, you know, they go crazy with the embellishments. It's just a lot of stuff going on in there. And, you know, there's a certain harmoniousness that is very pleasing. And especially in home decor, it's very, very pleasing in home decor. You don't want to walk in your house and just see, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on in there, you know. And so, you know, for me, my design aesthetic is a very simple one. It's simple elegance, okay? Executed flawlessly, okay? I have turned back quilts, you know, that have gone out to be quilted. If it comes back and it's got one little bobble in it, one little double stitch in it, I have turned it back. Okay, because we're like, no, you know, as perfect as handcrafting can be, you know, is what we aim for. And you aim for that in every piece, you know, and your voice will develop. You'll get more into the techniques that you're using, you know, where you want to expand out. It's not about doing the same exact thing, you know, but your voice will develop over time. And that's what's really great about it. Okay, so on to the last edict. The last edict for me, and it's a huge lesson to learn when you're an artist. You know, when you're an artist, you have the visual that comes to you. Now, I would say most artists are visual thinkers, okay, and we're visual people. So for me, it's my love of images, you know, that I've had very, very early on as a child, okay? And I would say if you talk to most quilters will tell you that, you know, we're visual people. We experience the world visually. So when I wake up in the morning, you know, I'm flooded with images. And I'm flooded with images that I see. I'm flooded with images that are stored in me. I'm flooded with images that I have put together in my head, you know. And so I have to try to navigate through all of that to produce my pieces, right? And my pieces can't contain every single thing that I'm thinking of, because then it's just a hot mess, right? And so what I have to learn to do is edit. And then I have to learn to execute. So the last edict, and it took me years to do this, And I think this is really why I didn't blog and I didn't have a website and I didn't do all of this stuff early, because I was really, from 2004 to about 2008, I was really focused on building the studio and doing the work in that studio. And I was full time working in my studio every single day. And I would say I didn't come out with the very first work that I was really, really happy with didn't come until 2008. That's really what I could say. I mean, honestly, as I look back at it now, I had 2 pieces, Stencil Haven, and they were actually, as I think about them now, they were surface design pieces. Oh my gosh. They were not quilts. They were surface design. Yes, that's right. I remember. They were surface design pieces, right? And I kind of always create in pairs, because I always, think, oh boy, if I mess up the first one, So I had created these identical pieces. I mean, the paintings on them were very different. And they used the backing, I remember, was Osnaburg muslin. And it's kind of a very loose weave muslin that I had painted on, and I glittered it and everything, but they were really cute. And then I put this really wide border on them because I wanted them to look like museum borders, those big wide borders that you see. They're like 3 inches, that you see if you go into the Impressionist room in the museums. And I wanted that really big wide border, and I did these kind of seam top stitching around, and it was really awesome. And I remember looking at them, and the first one I finished it, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I kind of hung it on the wall. I kind of just taped it up on the wall. I called my husband in there. I was like, oh my God, can you believe this? This is it. This is what I want Fabric Works to be. This is what I want Fabric Works to look like. And that was the very first time. And it was such a simple piece, though. It didn't have a lot of stitching in it. The stitching didn't even cover the whole surface, and it was just so simple. The border was simple, but it was just impeccably executed. And it was the very first time that my eyes were open to what this studio could be, what it could be. And it was a powerful moment for me, and I had really edited from my original vision of it, and I called it Stencil Haven because I was practicing all my stencils and stamps and things that I had learned. But it was amazing how I had really edited this piece down, and I truly didn't know, that whether it was going to work. I just remember throughout the piece, it was speaking very loud to me. No, I don't need this. No, I don't need that. And each time I would come with an extra, well, maybe I need an extra symbol here and an extra symbol there and more glitter here. It would just come to me that, girl, you don't need that. Put that away. You're almost done. Put it away. And it was just so simple. But that piece spoke volumes, and it had power on the wall. And as soon as I put it on the wall, I could see. I knew that, whoa, oh my gosh, And this learning how to edit is extremely important. And I see a lot of pieces out there that just, I don't know, you look at them and you can't, there's so much stuff on it. There's so much stuff there. Maybe it's just colors and stitching and embellishments and beadwork, and it's just so much shit on there. It's like, whoa, OMG, okay? You look at it and you just can't get the overall essence of that piece, and you can't get the overall feeling of that piece. So my last edict, learn to edit. Edit. And that really ties back into the simplify. right? There's genius in the simple, okay? Just know that when you're creating a piece, and I know it's sad, it's kind of sad because it's a difficult lesson, that just know that everything is not going to make it. All right, every idea that you put out there is not going to make it. Everything is not going to make it under your sewing machine. It's not going to make it to the final finishing table. You know, it's not going to make it. Okay. You know, when I design my collections now on the computer, when I do my digital surface designs, and I released my first collection in 2014, my first collection had 3 patterns in it. Okay. It was safari, and then luxury, which is done very well. A lot of people, it's been received very well, I should say. And then trends. Those 3 patterns were the top patterns that I picked from about 120 different files. Okay, so in other words, my draft collection, you know, I started, when I first started doing it, I was like in love with everything, right? And I had 120 different files, people, okay? And I narrowed that down over 3 rounds. And so the first round, it went from 120 to about 60. And then it went from 60 to 40. And then from 40 to 20. And the final collection has 3. You know, so that's the amount of editing that you look to do. You know, you're coming out with the best of the best. And does that really fit and incorporate into your voice? You know? And it's difficult. You know, it's difficult, especially when you're very emotional when you make your art. And you fall in love with pieces. You know, you fall in love with combinations of colors and combinations of fabrics. And, you know, you fall in love with certain threads and you want to use them all over, you know, and you fall in love with certain stitches and you want to use it all the time. You know, but it's really, when you start to mature in your art, it's the ability to edit and then to execute. And so I find that, hey, if you keep it as simple as possible, then you're feeding into, you know, the editing is what helps you to simplify, right? Staying with your voice is also what helps you to edit. You know, so when I'm working on a piece, it's like, okay, I can plan out a piece and say, oh yeah, okay, this is what I want to do, right? And then I look at and I consider that piece in the backdrop of my own voice and say, hey, what's the fabric work spin on this? You know, does this kind of fit into the fabric work spin? And if it doesn't, I try to get it, you know, to more where I can put my spin on it. What is my say in it? And then from there, it's like, okay, once I have a plan of what I'm going to do, I do it. And then along the way, I'm editing. Do we really need this? Does this characteristic, does this design, this little piece of the design really enhance the work, right? And then there's finally, you know, executing it. And so that would be it. So just to recap, we talked about focus, the importance of having focus in your work. Then we talked about simplifying, the importance of simplifying your work and bringing things to the essence of what that piece is. And then we talk about not overthinking, okay? Don't think, just do it, right? Just get started. Tweak it along the way. And then number 4, my favorite, just do you. Just do you. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing, right? Just do you. Then number 5, develop your voice. As an artist, develop your voice. Be in the studio. Commit to it every day. Make it part of your life, and then you can bring yourself through your art. And that is coming up with what is your signature. What do you want to be known for? What do you want people to see in those pieces? And being consistent there. And then what is your design aesthetic? What works for you? What doesn't work for you, right? And then finally, learn to edit. Learn how to really critically edit your work. And just realize, and it's okay, that everything is not going to make it. Right? Every choice that you make, every decision that you make, it's not going to make it to the final piece. And that's okay, right? It's not going to make it to the final collection. And that's fine. That's something that you learn to expect. And just know that all of this will just really feed into your execution. And you'll have a much purer execution. So anyway, it has been a pleasure talking to you about some of the key lessons that I've learned over 10 years in Fabric Works Studio, and we're still going strong and putting out collections. Feel free to visit me at fabricworksstudio.com. It's www.fabricworksstudio.com, and that's all one word. Feel free to visit my blog at trendinginsurfacedesign.com. So it's www.trendinginsurfacedesign.com. And this is Angela, and I will talk to you again. Bye for now.